Today I'm going to show you everything you may have missed in Friday the 13th, the game. I'm going to go through this game extensively and show you all of the references from the movies that they put in the game. Now, very similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a lot of them, so we're going to go ahead and get started. But if you like what I do here, consider subscribing and hit your notifications so you never miss one from me. Let's go ahead and get into it. Friday the 13th was really summed up well by a viewer of mine who said it was a love letter to fans, and that's exactly what it was. And they took great care with this franchise in order to bring us an authentic Jason game. And so no matter if you played as Jason or the counselors that he was trying to kill, it was super satisfying. Unfortunately, we never got to fully realize what this game could have been because of lawsuits. The good news is there's actually a new Friday the 13th game coming out. I made a video on that. I'll leave a card at the end of this video. And of course, I'd love to hear which one of these was your favorite to hear or see, and also some more I may have missed, and I may end up making a part 2 to this video. First one I want to talk about is a really cool one. So Shelley is a beloved character from part 3, and you can find his photo on the refrigerator in Higgins Haven. So you'll remember that Vera ends up with Shelley's wallet after their encounter with the bikers at the convenience store. She accidentally drops it in the water. She goes out to retrieve it. We see Jason with his iconic hockey mask for the very first time. He puts a spear through her dome, and of course she succumbs to that wound. Well, that was a real picture of Shelley and his mom. So after the movie, he took the picture, it's all washed out and everything, and he gave it to his mom where it sat on her refrigerator for 30 years until they finally retrieved it and scanned it and put it in the game. Now, speaking of that, Shelley, whose real name is Larry Zerner, actually does the voice acting for Shelley in the game. The original Tommy Jarvis, or grown-up Tommy Jarvis, I should say, Tom Matthews, does the voice acting for him in the game. And then Christina Klebb, she was actually from Rob Zombie's Halloween, does the voice acting for Jenny. By the way, it's not the same Jenny that's in part 2. Her name is actually spelled Ginny, and in the game it's Jenny. Also, the original screenwriter and director, Sean S. Cunningham and Victor Miller, have a part in making this game. There's also a road named Cunningham Road in the Crystal Lake map. By the way, there are a lot of little references that I picked up on, one of which is a little baseball cap. It says Blairstown, and Blairstown, New Jersey is where the original film was shot. By the way, the original camp you can still go to, and they fully embrace their Friday the 13th heritage, but it is a real functioning camp called Camp Nobi Bosco. I get text messages from them all the time, hey, we have so many openings, on this day or whatever, and so somewhere I definitely like to visit in the future. One thing that we all use in the game quite often, especially if you're playing counselor, are the gas cans. Those look identical to the gas cans that the bikers used in part 3. Also, the outhouses look just like the ones in part 3. They got the half moon crescent on the front of them. You'll remember that's where Chuck lights up a joint and eventually meets his demise.
Heavy shit.
Also, there's ladders that are just randomly placed up against, inside of cabins. I think some of them might be outside the cabins, but these look just like the ladders that are used in part 1 by our first final girl, Alice, when she's hanging up the gutter. Now, here's a cool one that Mrs. Heckshot pointed out. You'll see a bicycle that's randomly propped up against some of the cabins. It looks very similar to the bicycle that Crazy Ralph uses in part 1 and 2. Now, his does have a little basket up front, so it's not exactly like that one, but it does look very similar. There's also a random teddy bear on one of the shelves in some of the cabins, and I believe this is a reference to Friday the 13th, the final chapter, where you have Creepy Ted that's hitting on the two identical twins and, holds up the teddy bear and all that. I think that's a reference to that. Also, you'll notice some lampshades that have various pictures on them. That's from part 3. One thing you'll notice is yellow jackets that are hanging up on coat racks in various places around Camp Crystal Lake especially, but the reason they use yellow and then red doors, which are also in the game, of course, is because of the lighting, especially in the first one, right? So they use those bright colors so they could actually, or you, the viewer, could distinguish certain things in the film because, again, it was so dark. Also, you'll see some hammocks on the wall. I believe these are a reference to part 3 where Debbie lays in the hammock after her and Andy, have a little get together. She reads the magazine, blood drips on it. She realizes Andy is up in the freaking rafters. And then, of course, Jason puts the knife through her throat. Now, like I said, they took great care in creating environments that you recognize from the movies. And so Packanack Lodge, for example, where the counselors first come up on the stairs, or where you have the bell that Paul rings to get the counselor's attention. That, of course, is there. You have the lifeguard stand that Jenny and her friends are hanging out at and, telling jokes. And Camp Crystal Lake, they have the lifeguard tower, and then the dock that comes around that they're all, jumping off into the lake. Also in Camp Crystal Lake, they, of course, have the archery range. They also have the cabin where, Ned kind of sees somebody go into the door, and then we never see him again in the film until, Kevin Bacon happens to have a little bit of a blood drop on him whenever he's in the bed. And so, there's all kinds of locations like that. If you go to the graveyard, you will see Pamela Voorhees' gravestone right there. You also see another gravestone that says, just has a bunch of 13s on it. There's another gravestone with H2O Delirious's name on it. You have different loading screens that show similar situations to those that happen in the movie. You have the impaled counselors, Jeff and Sandra from part 2. You have the moment in part 3 where Jason grabs Rick and Chris comes out. She thinks she hears something, but she kind of nervously goes back inside. And then, of course, he squeezes his head. And this movie was done in 3D at the time, so, the eyeball puffs out at you on screen. You have the moment when Marcy is in the bathroom, right? And then she obviously meets her demise in there, and they have the same light fixture that's swinging back and forth after she gets killed.
Hey, come on, you guys.
You also have the pot on the stove that looks like the same one that Chuck was actually cooking popcorn in. You'll notice the unlucky counselor that is in every cutscene before the game actually starts is actually Rob from Friday the 13th, the final chapter. He's actually the brother to Sandra from Friday the 13th, part 2. There's a box that says Palmer on it, as in Betsy Palmer, the original Mrs. Voorhees. You got the dartboard from part 3. The yellow raft that Samantha actually gets killed in the final chapter is on the bank in the Jarvis House map. There's 2 red life jackets that are on some of the walls. You can find that in the original film. And you'll see pictures on the walls in various locations and some of the cabins. And some of these are some of the guys that actually made this game. And you can see Kane Hodder himself. One of the cars you can escape in is a yellow 2-door car that looks like the one that Jenny hid behind in part 2. I wanted to point out that the way Chuck looks and turns around before he goes into that outhouse looks very similar to some of the animations the counselors use in the game. The kind of nervous, hunched down look, with the flashlight. I don't know, I thought it was kind of maybe a cool reference. And the first place you'll see Jason use a throwing knife is in part 3. After Chris stabs him, he pulls it out of his leg and chunks it at her. Now, of course, in the Jarvis house, you have Tommy Jarvis's bedroom with all his mask and all that kind of stuff. One detail that's not so obvious, though, is you'll notice how one of the windows facing the house the teenagers were staying at, the blind is closed and the curtain is pulled too. And that looks like the same window where he sees Samantha start to unclothe a little bit and he starts going nuts. Jason's shack is faithfully recreated, not only with his mother's head and a machete and, of course, her sweater, but it also has a box fan hanging on the wall and the toilet to the right of that with the little pull curtain. That's the same curtain that the officer pulled back, and then he got the hammer to the back of the dome. And the last thing we'll talk about in this video are some of the kills themselves. And so you, of course, have the infamous sleeping bag kill from Friday the 13th, The New Blood. You, of course, have Jason Takes Manhattan, where he punches the boxer's head clean off. And there's many others, but I actually want to cover the best kills in Friday the 13th, the game, in a separate video. I'd love to hear which one of these references, again, was your favorite. And if you like this video, make sure you check out the one I did on Texas Chainsaw Massacre game. Big thanks to you guys for watching. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.